In a bold move, Israeli engineers launched a groundbreaking megaproject in the desert that could reshape global power dynamics. The audacious project, the Ben Gurion Canal, spanning 60 miles through the Negev Desert, promises to challenge Egypt's dominance. But with towering engineering and political obstacles, can this daring vision become a groundbreaking reality? Join us as we reveal what happened when Israel spilled billions of tons of water into the desert. The Ever Given disaster.
The Ever Given, one of the world's largest container ships, was blown sideways and became jammed on the Suez Canal in Egypt.
The Suez Canal has been a vital trade route between Europe and Asia since its completion in 1869, and for over a century, it allowed ships to move goods quickly and efficiently. But everything changed on March 23, 2021, when a massive shipping disaster unfolded. A sudden sandstorm caused the colossal Ever Given, a container ship, to get stuck diagonally across the canal.
One of the world's most important shipping routes, and it's blocked.
The story started earlier that month. On March 13th, the Ever Given departed from Malaysia, crossing the Indian Ocean toward the Suez Canal. The plan was to pass through the canal, enter the Mediterranean, and deliver cargo to ports in Rotterdam, Felixstowe, and Hamburg by early April. After 10 days of seamless sailing, the Ever Given reached the entrance of the canal, where it joined a convoy of 15 ships moving northward. As the fifth vessel in line, the ship took on experienced Suez Canal pilots to guide it through the narrow, single-lane stretch of the canal. However, the situation was anything but ordinary. Strong winds and a severe dust storm made navigation extremely challenging. The Ever Given's immense size, with a wind-facing area of 20,000 square meters, turned it into a giant sail. By comparison, the largest sailing ships have only about 5,000 square meters of wind-facing surface. That morning, 31-mile-per-hour winds hit the ship broadside, with gusts reaching 45 miles per hour. Stacked high with containers, the Ever Given faced an immense force, over 270 tons of wind pressure. This was like 3 powerful tugboats pushing against its side. In the cramped, dusty Suez Canal, visibility was poor, and the ship struggled to stay steady. As it navigated the first left-hand bend, data from ship trackers showed the vessel swaying back and forth in the strong wind. Barely 15 minutes into the canal, the Ever Given veered left and overcorrected, setting the stage for disaster.
Stopping all vessels from entering or leaving one of the world's busiest trade routes.
A phenomenon known as the bank effect came into play. The narrow space between the ship's left side and the canal wall created high water pressure, pushing the bow away. Meanwhile, low pressure at the rear sucked the stern toward the bank, like how air creates lift over a wing. The result? The ship turned sharply, pointing diagonally across the canal. The relentless wind worsened the situation. Despite the crew's efforts, the Ever Given ran aground minutes later. Its bow dug into the eastern bank, while the stern lodged firmly on the western side. The Suez Canal, one of the world's busiest trade routes, was completely blocked. Initial rescue attempts began with 7 small tugs trying to shift the massive ship. It became clear, though, that the Ever Given was stuck at both ends. As the day turned to night, efforts to free the vessel failed, prompting an international rescue operation. The crew began pumping out fuel and 90,000 tons of ballast water to lighten the ship. By Wednesday, March 24th, excavators had worked to dig the bow out of the eastern bank. On Thursday, March 25th, 8 tugs joined the effort, assisted by an Egyptian dredger named Mashour. Over 4 days, Mashour removed 30,000 cubic meters of sand from around the ship. But even with the massive excavation, the Ever Given refused to budge. discussions began about removing some containers to reduce weight further. The next day, the Suez Canal Authority accepted help from the US Navy, which sent dredging experts. Meanwhile, a Dutch maritime company, Royal Boskalis Westminster, took charge of the operation. On Sunday, a powerful tugboat called ALP Guard arrived. With its superior pulling strength, it added much-needed muscle to the effort. The plan to free the Ever Given was simple in theory, but challenging in practice. Teams from Egypt, Japan, and the Netherlands worked together, using their combined expertise. They aimed to push the ship's stern away from the western bank, while pulling the bow forward with precision and force. In the early hours of Monday, March 29th, ALP Guard finally made progress. The Ever Given shifted slightly as the tugs managed to move its stern away from the bank. To aid the effort, Royal Boskalis calculated that adding 2,000 tons of water into the stern ballast tanks would raise the bow just enough for the tugs to pull her free. They timed the operation with the supermoon high tide, maximizing their chances of success. A second large tugboat, Carlo Magno, joined the operation, adding more pulling strength. Together, these two giants focused on dragging the bow forward, while smaller tugs pushed the stern toward the bank. After hours of intense effort, the Ever Given finally refloated. Once freed, the Ever Given was towed to the Great Bitter Lake for inspection, and the Suez Canal was reopened. However, with 12% of global trade, including over 1 million barrels of oil and 8% of liquefied natural gas, flowing through the canal daily, the financial losses were staggering. Lloyd's List reported that the blockage held up $9.8 billion in trade per day, equivalent to $400 million per hour. The crisis struck hard, revealing just how much the world relied on the Suez Canal.
50 ships a day normally pass through the canal, carrying 12% of the world's trade.
But this wasn't the first time its closure had caused chaos. The last time it happened, the disruption dragged on for over a decade, long enough to change the course of history.
The container ship that was blocking the Suez Canal for nearly a week finally made it through.
Monopolizing the Suez Canal. In 1888, the European powers signed the Constantinople International Convention, which guaranteed free passage for all ships through the Suez Canal, both during wartime and peacetime. After World War I, the League of Nations, an organization that later evolved into the United Nations, granted Britain and France control over various territories in the Middle East, coincidentally, around the Suez Canal, that were considered incapable of self-governance. France was given Syria and Lebanon, while Britain took Iraq and Palestine under its mandate. The borders of these territories were drawn by European powers without input from the local populations. The United States opposed this mandated system, viewing it as a way for the victorious European nations to reshape the region to serve their interests, using international law to give it a facade of legitimacy, but nothing could be done to stop these European powers. In 1921, Britain carved out Transjordan from Palestine, establishing it as a separate kingdom. The following year, Britain formalized its control over Egypt, effectively asserting its dominance over the Suez Canal. Even after independence, Britain and France retained significant economic and political control over the newly formed nations in the Middle East. However, in the 1950s, the rise of Pan-Arabism, a nationalist movement aimed at uniting Arab countries, began to reshape the region's political landscape. Pan-Arabism argued that all Arabic-speaking peoples, from North Africa to the Persian Gulf, were one unified group with a shared identity and destiny. If Arabs were truly united, then they needed one leader to represent their collective interests. That leader, Gamal Abdel Nasser, sought to become. Nasser rose to power in Egypt in 1952, overthrowing King Farouk in a coup. He saw the king as a puppet of Britain, a symbol of the old colonial order. After taking control, Nasser became the first Arab leader to fully embrace Pan-Arabism as a state policy. He aimed to create a new era, free from the influence of colonial powers. In Nasser's eyes, Israel was an extension of Western colonialism, an artificial state created by the US and European powers to serve their interests. He believed Israel had no rightful place in the Middle East and should be destroyed. Nasser's views on Israel were also tinged with anti-Semitism. He frequently spoke of a global Jewish conspiracy and played a role in spreading the false document known as the Protocols of the Elders of Zion.
The Jews were living here in Egypt, and they are living here in Egypt, in spite of their propaganda.
He even denied the Holocaust, dismissing the claim that 6 million Jewish lives were lost during World War II as a lie not worth taking seriously. Nasser's government quickly moved to implement sweeping reforms, including the confiscation of private property. These bold actions caused alarm in Great Britain, which had occupied Egypt since 1882 and considered the country critical to its interests. Chief among these was Britain's determination to retain control of the Suez Canal, as over 2/3 of Europe's oil supply flowed through the canal. Just after Israel's independence war, Egypt blocked Israeli ships from using the canal, cutting off vital trade routes to East Africa and Asia. It also limited Israel's access to oil from the Persian Gulf. For many Arabs, Pan-Arabism seemed like the answer to their collective grief, propelling Nasser to immense popularity. But for the Europeans, this was a massive threat that needed to be tackled. The first call to action by the European powers was for Britain, France, and the United States to agree to limit arms sales to the Middle East to maintain a balance of power between Arabs and Israelis. However, Nasser, eager to strengthen Egypt's military, turned to the Soviet Union for support. During the height of the Cold War, the Soviets were more than willing to supply Egypt with weapons, seeing it as an opportunity to counter Western influence in the region. In September 1955, a massive arms deal between Egypt and the Soviet Union was announced, escalating tensions among Western powers and Israel.
Off of one another to really benefit Egypt and thus benefit the entire Middle East.
This arms buildup, combined with existing animosities, ultimately set the stage for the Sinai War the following year. As the second call to action, Israel, Britain, and France decided to act. On October 22, 1996, Israeli Prime Minister David Ben Gurion, Defense Minister Shimon Peres, and IDF Chief of Staff General Moshe Dayan secretly met French and British officials at a secluded house in France. During this meeting, the French proposed a bold plan. First, Israel would launch an attack on Egyptian forces in the Sinai Peninsula, creating the appearance of a major conflict near the canal. Then, Britain and France would intervene, claiming to separate the fighting sides while using the opportunity to seize control of the canal and possibly remove Nasser from power. The plan allowed the Europeans to portray themselves as impartial mediators, though their true aim was clear. Although Israel distrusted Britain, given their tense history, it reluctantly agreed to the plan, as the French insisted on Britain's involvement. The three nations signed a secret agreement, and the operation began on October 29th. According to the plan, Israeli troops advanced into the Sinai Desert with paratroopers to capture the strategic Mitla Pass, a key route to the canal. By the next day, Israeli forces had taken 3 Egyptian military bases and moved within 30 miles of the canal. Britain then issued a formal demand for both Israel and Egypt to withdraw their forces from the canal zone. As expected, Egypt refused to comply, which gave Britain and France a pretext to act. On October 31st, British and French warplanes bombed Egyptian airfields, crippling Nasser's air force. Meanwhile, Israeli forces struck the Gaza Strip to dismantle the Fedayeen infrastructure and continued their advance through the Sinai, eventually reaching the town of Sharm el-Sheikh. Within a week, Israel had decisively defeated the Egyptian military, secured the Straits of Tiran, and taken control of much of the eastern Sinai Peninsula. The combined operation temporarily achieved its military goals, though it would face strong international backlash in the weeks to come. The United States eventually stepped in, firmly demanding that Britain, France, and Israel withdraw their forces. Under mounting pressure, all three nations complied. The Suez Canal's complete shutdown triggered a major global economic crisis. After the 1967 Six-Day War, the canal remained closed for another 8 years, highlighting its vulnerability as a critical trade route. For Israel, these closures were particularly devastating. With trade routes blocked, the country suffered significant economic losses. Between 1957 and 1967, only a few ships managed to reach Israel's port of Eilat each month, severely limiting trade. The disruption hit Israel hard, but global trade felt the strain too, dependent on the canal's smooth flow. What the world didn't see coming was Israel's quiet preparation, an alternative that was now ready to change everything. The Ben Gurion Canal. The concept of the Israeli Canal had its roots in the mid-1800s, when the British explored the possibility of connecting the Red Sea and the Dead Sea. In 1955, William Allen, a British naval officer and explorer, came up with an alternative to the Suez Canal. He envisioned a canal linking three major water bodies, the Red Sea, the Dead Sea, and the Mediterranean Sea, as a more affordable option compared to the Suez Canal. His plan proposed a direct link between the Mediterranean Sea and the Gulf of Aqaba, creating a route to the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. In the 1960s, the United States also considered a canal project to rival the Suez Canal. This idea gained traction in 1963 as a response to Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser's nationalization of the Suez Canal in 1956.
But undeterred, President Nasser raises his country's flag to symbolize his action.
However, it wasn't until 1994 that the idea of the Israeli Canal became widely known. Named after Israel's first Prime Minister, David Ben Gurion, the project generated significant interest and debate. The project aimed to link the Red Sea to the Mediterranean, beginning at the Gulf of Aqaba near Eilat, passing through the Arava Valley, and continuing northward along the Dead Sea Basin. It would then skirt the Gaza Strip before connecting with the Mediterranean Sea. This ambitious route spanned about 62 miles, cutting through the rugged terrain of the Negev Desert and the Jordanian highlands. On April 2, 2021, Israel announced plans to start building the Ben Gurion Canal by June of that same year. This project posed a direct challenge to Egypt's economic reliance on the Suez Canal, which had been a major source of income through transit charges from passing ships. By 2021, 20,649 vessels used the Suez Canal, a 10% increase from the previous year. Revenue kept growing, reaching $8 billion in 2022 and an all-time high of $9.4 billion in 2023. However, if Israel built an alternative canal, Egypt risked losing a significant share of its revenue and ship traffic, a loss that could have serious economic consequences. Israel argues that the proposed canal would provide a crucial alternative for large ships unable to pass through the narrower Suez Canal due to size limitations. If built, The canal would stretch 293 kilometers, making it about one-third longer than the 193-kilometer Suez Canal. Its construction is estimated to cost $55 billion, but its potential is immense. Control of the canal would grant significant influence over global shipping routes for essential commodities like oil and grain. Israel projects an annual revenue of $6 billion or more from the canal, solidifying its position as a major player in international trade. The canal is also expected to prevent disruptions in global trade, like the 2021 Suez Canal blockage caused by Even Given.
Now, it's one of the world's most important shipping routes, and it's blocked. A giant container ship ran aground in the Suez Canal after losing power.
To address such issues, the Ben Gurion Canal would feature two parallel canals, allowing ships to travel in both directions without delays. Unlike the sandy banks of the Suez Canal, the Israeli canal would be built with rocky walls, reducing maintenance costs significantly. Israel plans to transform the surrounding area into a bustling hub of activity, with new cities, hotels, restaurants, and entertainment venues along the canal. Each canal is designed to be 50 meters deep and 200 meters wide, 10 meters deeper than the Suez Canal, capable of accommodating some of the world's largest ships, measuring up to 300 meters in length and 110 meters in width. This ambitious project has the potential to reshape global trade and establish Israel as a major force in the shipping industry, but how Israel plans on executing it is still a mystery. Building the impossible. To understand how the Ben Gurion Canal might be constructed, let's look back at how the Suez Canal was constructed. Back in the 19th century, particularly in the construction initial stages, workers relied entirely on manual labor.
Construction was supposed to take 3 years, but workers labored day and night.
Thousands of local peasants toiled with basic tools like picks and shovels, resulting in painstakingly slow progress. Facing a shortage of workers, the project's leader, French diplomat Ferdinand de Lesseps, and the Suez Canal Company turned to technology. Fortunately, steam-powered equipment was available at the time. They brought in hundreds of specialized steam and coal-powered dredgers and excavators, which significantly accelerated the process. These machines managed to move about 3/4 of the 2.6 billion cubic feet of sand needed to complete the canal. Even with these advancements, the project took a decade to finish, 4 years longer than expected. That was over a century ago, and construction techniques have advanced greatly since then. For example, in 2014, the Suez Canal underwent a major expansion. Engineers dug a new parallel channel, upgraded ports, built tunnels, and established industrial zones and fish farms. Though the original plan was to complete this in 3 years, the work was finished in just 1 year after Egypt's president pushed for faster progress. The Ben Gurion Canal, which would be much longer than the Suez, is expected to benefit from modern methods and could be completed in 5 to 10 years. The process for building canals hasn't changed much. Engineers create a detailed plan. Excavation begins with braces to stabilize the walls. The canal is sealed to prevent leaks, and locks are installed to manage water levels. Finally, water from a nearby source is pumped in to fill the canal. Experts predict that the Ben Gurion Canal would take about 5 years to build, involving around 300,000 engineers and skilled workers from across the globe. Over time, several methods for excavation have been suggested, including one particularly shocking proposal from 1963. That year, Howard David McCarby from the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory proposed a shocking idea, using 520 underground nuclear explosions to carve a 155-mile canal through the Negev Desert. This bold plan was part of the U.S. Project Plowshare initiative, which explored the use of nuclear detonations for massive construction projects. Although the details of the proposal remained classified until 1993, it was never put into action, a decision many are thankful for. The suggestion showed the challenges of traditional excavation methods, which were seen as too expensive and impractical for such a colossal task. The vision for the Ben Gurion Canal has remained an ambitious idea, confined to paper for decades. It's uncertain when or if construction will ever begin. Still, if Israel manages to push past the excavation stages, channeling water through the desert would be another challenge. Flooding the desert. Unlike the Suez Canal, which benefited from a pre-existing waterway and relatively flat terrain, the new canal would face much greater challenges. Carving through difficult landscapes and securing a reliable water supply would be significant obstacles. A bold proposal to address a related issue, saving the dying Dead Sea, recently emerged. The plan, known as the Red Sea-Dead Sea Conveyance, or the Two Seas Canal, aims to link the Red Sea to the Dead Sea through a 110-mile pipeline. While the project has been considered for years, it first surfaced in the 19th century when the British Empire sought an alternative route to the Suez Canal, which had already been built by the French. At the time, it was little more than an ambitious idea, with no concrete plans. The idea gained serious traction in 2005 when Jordan, Israel, and the Palestinian Authority agreed to a feasibility study. By 2013, the neighboring countries had committed to working together on the project. The pipeline was to start in Aqaba on the Red Sea, traveling through Jordan to the Lisan area near the Dead Sea. Along the way, it would have passed through desalination plants and a hydroelectric station to provide drinking water and electricity to the region. The project could have helped combat the rapid decline of the Dead Sea, which has been shrinking at an alarming rate. In the past 5 decades, its water level dropped by 148 feet and continued to fall by about 3 feet every year, leading to environmental issues such as sinkholes and receding shorelines. The initial construction cost for the canal was estimated at $10 billion, with the first phase planned to begin in 2021, costing $1.1 billion. However, in 2021, the project was put on hold due to rising tensions between the countries involved. Given the current circumstances, it seemed increasingly unlikely that the Dead Sea would survive. Israel, facing its own water scarcity, has been using reverse osmosis technology to desalinate seawater for over 2 decades. This process removed salt from seawater, providing a reliable source of drinking water for the country. 5 desalination plants along the Mediterranean coast supplied water to nearly 10 million people. One key use of this desalinated water was replenishing the Sea of Galilee, a freshwater lake in northern Israel that had been a vital resource for thousands of years. The Sea of Galilee still supplied water for farming and vineyards, making it crucial for the region's agricultural needs. As temperatures rose and water demand surged, the future of the Sea of Galilee became a growing concern. If the lake were to dry up, it would spell disaster for Israel. To address this, authorities proposed an innovative plan: desalinate water from the Mediterranean and pump it into the Sea of Galilee to maintain its levels. While this seemed like a creative solution, it raised a pressing question: who would ensure that water flowing out of the Sea of Galilee would eventually make its way back to the Mediterranean? That has long been a paradox. Nevertheless, Israel's strong foundation in science and engineering allows it to take on this ambitious endeavor. While the Suez Canal remains unmatched in its capacity to handle vast amounts of cargo, Israel has explored alternatives. Eilat, a city on the Red Sea with a functioning port, has presented a potential alternative route to the Suez Canal. This new route could have allowed Israel to bypass the Suez entirely. However, the idea came with several hurdles. Firstly, Expanding Eilat's port to support a railway line capable of handling significant cargo volumes proved impossible without causing severe environmental damage. Secondly, the project risked igniting political tensions with Egypt, which stood to lose substantial revenue from the Suez Canal. Lastly, even with an expanded port, the railway wouldn't be able to accommodate the high cargo volumes necessary to make the route economically viable. Ultimately, this alternative couldn't compete with the Suez Canal. The proposed route was only capable of handling small shipments and was meant to serve as a backup in emergencies, like when the Suez was blocked or temporarily closed.
A container ship blocking the Suez Canal could be stuck for weeks.
In 2012, the government approved plans for a rail link to Eilat, designed for both passenger transport and limited cargo, a modest step when compared to the ambitious vision of the Ben Gurion Canal. However, if Israel successfully builds the Ben Gurion Canal, its impact will extend far beyond the region, sending ripples through global economies and reshaping the world in ways no one can yet fully predict. The butterfly effect. Israel has already made some of its plans clear to the world, and one that has caught the attention of many is the fact that the country intends to install surveillance devices at the canal's depths, monitoring systems throughout its length, and an advanced barrier to detect weapons. Every ship passing through would be photographed using laser-based imaging systems, ensuring strict security. The Ben Gurion Canal would give Israel greater independence, freeing it from relying on the Suez Canal, which Arab states have used as leverage against the nation. By controlling its route between the Red Sea and the Mediterranean, Israel could strengthen its position in the region and reduce outside pressure. One of the biggest military advantages would be the canal's strategic location. It could reduce the importance of the Suez Canal for U.S. military support to Israel, giving Israel even more control over its security. However, there's a critical challenge: Gaza. Gaza sits in a key position for the canal's potential route. While most proposed designs avoid Gaza by taking a longer, winding path, a direct route through Gaza would save billions of dollars and significantly cut travel time. But this would require Israel to take full control of Gaza, a move that comes with serious political and humanitarian consequences. From an economic and strategic perspective, the canal could shake up global trade. It might disrupt China's Belt and Road Initiative and affect energy supplies in critical regions like the Strait of Hormuz, where 30% of the world's energy passes through. Some experts warn that such a massive shift in power dynamics could even spark global conflict. And that's all for today. Thanks for watching.